Mr. Luckman and I welcome you to another discussion of the great ideas. Today, as we continue with the consideration of love, we shall be concerned with the nature of erotic or sexual love. We shall try to understand how love can be sexual and at the same time truly love. Someone listening to this program for the first time might be surprised by this statement. They might say, what? Is that a problem? How love can be sexual and at the same time truly love? Isn't the problem quite the reverse? How can love be love unless it involves or in some way has the participation of sexual interest or the sexual instincts? Hence, I think a word or a word or two of explanation is necessary right away. I think that every one of us uses the word love in a broader or wider sense than simply to refer to sexual love. Granted that when the word love appears in newspaper headlines or in advertisements, it usually does mean sexual love or erotic love. Granted that most of the great love stories tell the stories of love between men and women. Granted even that when one uses such phrases as first love or love at first sight, the image that comes to mind is that of a boy and a girl. Nevertheless, it is not just the philosophers and the theologians who have a broader meaning for the word love. We all do. We all speak of the love of children for parents, of parents for children, of the love of patriots for their country, and of the love of religious persons for God.
Well, now, Dr. Adler, while I'm not myself a Freudian, I think that those who are might certainly object that all of these loves that you've enumerated are, according to Freud at least, merely extensions of sexual love. I think Freud's word is sublimations, isn't that it?
That is the word. It's exactly the word, and your question, Mr. Luckman, anticipates what I was just about to say. In fact, I think I said in the first place, and now I do want to say in the second place, we are concerned with Freud, or perhaps more accurately I should say, in the second place, we are concerned with two opposed theories of love. And here, in this opposition, Freud represents one extreme and Aristotle the diametrically opposite extreme. For Freud, all love is sexual in origin and sexual in basis. Even loves that do not look as if they involve sex are, as Mr. Luckman said, sublimations of sexual interest or sexual drives. For Aristotle, on the other hand, relationships which are based on a desire for pleasure, sexual pleasure, are not, in his judgment, in his conception, love. They do not even originate in that way. For Aristotle, the mainspring of love is benevolence, and sexual desire participates in the nature of love only insofar as it is associated with benevolent impulses. Now, these 2 points of view do look quite irreconcilable, but I think it is not as bad as that. I think I can show that there is some agreement between Freud and Aristotle, at least on the main point of today's consideration, the nature of sexual love. Now, what I'm going to do as I proceed is to first get the problem stated a little more clearly, then see if I can propose steps toward its solution, and finally, if that is not quite the solution, I shall deal with some difficulties that remain to be met with and considered. Let me begin at once with an attempt to get the problem stated for us. Everyone, including Aristotle and Freud, I think, agree on the essential characteristics of love. with or without sex. Everyone, I think, agrees that certain things must be present if a relationship is to be properly called a relationship of love. I would like to show you in a chart the two things, at least, that everyone agrees upon as essential to the nature of a relationship which is love. Let me go to this chart and show you. Here are the essentials of love. Nothing is love which does not involve, first, benevolent impulses. Impulses to benefit the other person, to do good to the person loved. And secondly, nothing is love which does not involve desire for union, the desire to be with, the desire to become with the other person, the person loved. Without these things, we have mere sexuality, not love. Let me explain what I mean by mere sexuality. By mere sexuality, I mean the gratification of sexual impulses or desires, the fulfillment of the sexual or reproductive instincts. Now we find this, mere sexuality, we find this and only this in the mating of animals. It seems to me that the mating of animals is an act of sexual union totally devoid of love. There is no evidence whatsoever of love in the behavior of animals.
Now, would you hold on just a moment, Dr. Adler, before you go any further? Are you really, I think, going a little too fast for me? Because I feel that most people who have animals for pets believe that their dog or their cat or their horse loves them. In fact, they would say that the pet loves them even better sometimes than humans do. And more than this, you said that the desire for union is a mark of love, right?
Yes.
Well, now, isn't animal mating an expression of the desire for union? And if it is, why isn't that love?
Let me begin by answering your first question. I must say, flatly, that I don't think domesticated animals or pets love their domesticators. But this is one argument I don't want to get into. I know I can't convince people on this point. I've tried and failed. Now, let me see if I can state the problem with which we are concerned in the light of this last point. We are not concerned today with sexuality apart from love, nor with love apart from sexuality. We are concerned with those relationships involving both sex and love, when fused together to form that quite remarkable amalgam which we call sexual love or erotic love, which draws upon man's animality, his physical nature, and also upon his rationality and the spiritual side of his nature. Now it is here, in the understanding of this fusion of sex with love to produce erotic love, that I think Freud and Aristotle tend to agree. Perhaps this is only here that we can find them in agreement. For Aristotle says that the desire for pleasure, the desire for sexual pleasure, must be subordinated to consideration for, admiration for, respect for the other person, if that desire is to participate in a relationship that is genuinely love. That's what Aristotle says. Now listen to Freud. For Freud says that uninhibited sexuality, sexual impulses that are not restrained, controlled, inhibited, or sublimated, result in mere sexuality. Sexuality on an animal or bestial level. For Freud, as well as for Aristotle, although the terms are different, for Freud, love results when the sexual impulses are sufficiently inhibited to produce tender emotions, feelings of tenderness, tender impulses. And Freud even says, I think, that in proportion as sheer sexuality is inhibited and tenderness comes to predominate in the relationship, you have more and more love of the human sort and less mere animal sexuality. Now, I could easily appreciate many of you thinking that I've made this up, that I've attributed to Freud words or even ideas that are not his own. And therefore, I'd like to turn to Freud and support what I've just said is his view, that, and this point seems to correspond so directly with that of Aristotle. I'd mark the passage that I'd like to read you. Freud says, being in love is based upon the simultaneous presence of directly sexual tendencies and of sexual tendencies that are inhibited in their aims, so that the object draws a part of the narcissistic ego libido to itself. That's a big word. What does Freud mean by this last statement? Well, he means, first of all, that when a person is in love, he ceases to love only himself. That's what he means by narcissistic ego libido, that concentration on loving oneself. You remember Narcissus was the ancient man who admired himself and only himself as he looked at himself in the reflection of the pond. So that with the control of one's narcissism, some of that love is given to the other person, the loved object. But more important than this point about narcissism, what does Freud mean by the phrase sexual tendencies that are inhibited in their aim, which for him is the cause of the shift from purely selfish desire to love? To understand that, I must turn to another passage in which he does explain that. This other passage in which Freud tells us that when the sexual instincts are inhibited in their aim, I quote, the emotions which we feel toward the objects of our sexual interest are characterized as tender. And then he goes on to say, the depth, I quote again, the depth to which anyone is in love, as contrasted with purely sensual desire, may be measured by the size of the share in the love taken by the tenderness resulting from inhibited sexual instincts. Now, let me see if we can, from this point on, take some steps to solving the problem that is our problem now, the problem of how these two things can be fused. How can sexuality on the one hand and the benevolent impulses of love be fused to form one relationship? The first step in approaching a solution to this problem is, I think, to understand how sexual desire differs from all other bodily desires. It is a bodily desire, but it differs from all the other bodily desires, like hunger and thirst. There are three things that we should look at now to see how sexual desire differs from other bodily desires. In the first place, all other bodily desires are desires for things to be used or consumed, while sexual desire, like love itself, is a desire for another person, another human being. In the second place, sexual desire is never simply a desire for pleasure. It arises and is associated with the reproductive instincts. And for this reason, it has an aim beyond pleasure, a reproductive or procreative, a genuinely creative aim. It seeks to produce an image of itself. An image of what? Not of the persons, each by himself, but an image of their union. And this leads to the third and perhaps deepest point about sexual desire, that its aim, its direction, is toward union. Let me summarize these 3 points about sexual desire in this chart. The elements of sexual desire are, as we've seen, first, that this desire is satisfied by a person, not by a thing. Second, that it is a desire associated with a procreative, and in a sense, a genuinely creative aim. And in the third, place, and most important of all, it is a desire which is culminated in physical union.
You know, Dr. Adler,
Yes.
I think now I'm beginning to see exactly what it is that you're driving at. For example, in the first chart, the one on the essentials of love, there you made desire for union, as I emphasized in my other question, an essential of love. And now here in this second chart, you make union the main aim of sexual desire. Now, is this how you then fuse sex and love into sexual love?
Yes, Mr. Luckman, that is the heart of the matter. But I don't think I have fully clarified this last point about union, which seems to be so important, as you just said, that I'd like to spend a moment more to clarify it. Let me see if I can go more deeply into the understanding of what it means to have union as the aim both of sex and of love. But let's ask ourselves the question, with sex love left out for the moment, with sex left out, what is the union? What is the nature of the union that lovers seek? The answer is it must be a spiritual union. A spiritual union achieved through sharing the same things, through knowing and understanding one another, through knowledge, and above all, through conversation. Without these things, two persons cannot enter spiritually into one another's lives. Now then, let me call your attention to what, for me, is one of the most striking facts. What are the words in our English tradition of English speech, that we use to refer to sexual union? What are the words used in the English Bible? What are the words used in the tradition of English and American law? Well, in the Bible, the word is know. It is said there that Abraham knew Sarah and begat Isaac. And here, another passage in the Bible, in Genesis, we find Lot speaking of his two daughters who were virgins and saying of them that they knew not men. We turn to the law. What is the word we use in the law for sexual union? Most amazing. The word is conversation. And when the sexual union is illegal, we speak of carnal conversation or perhaps criminal conversation. But even if you add carnal and criminal, the point remains. It is called conversation. I think this is, I can't exaggerate what for me is the importance and significance of this simple fact. For what it signifies to me is that the desire for sexual union, or even the existence of sexual union, is a physical expression of the desire for spiritual union. Or you can put that in the reverse, that the desire for spiritual union is a sublimation of the desire for physical union. In either case, what we see is that union in body, together with union in soul, constitutes sexual or erotic love. Now, let me see if I can make then a full statement, or a fuller statement at least, of the solution, or as much of it as we have now reached. It seems that human sexuality can take two directions in human life. We can have sex in the service of love, and then we have it elevated and humanized. Or we can have sex divorced from love, and then we have it degraded to the level of bestial or animal conduct. When you have sex in the divorce from love, you have mere sexuality. You have something that is like lust, like animal desire. In fact, the very opposite of love, because it is selfish, because it is entirely acquisitive, and worse than that, it is often quite cruel. But when you have sex in the service of love, then you have genuine erotic love. Not just sex, nor love, but the combination which is erotic love. And this, it seems to me, this this combination can be defined by three things that I would like to show you as sort of summarizing the discussion in a chart. Here we see the nature of sexual love. It involves the desire to please as well as to be pleased. It involves compassion and sympathy for the other person, as well as passion. And most important of all, this third point, it involves an understanding of sexual union, an understanding of sexual union as a physical form, or as a physical form of knowledge or conversation.
I must say, Dr. Adler, that the way in which this third chart now pulls together the points which you made separately in charts 1 and 2. Remember the first one about the
Yes.
essentials of love, and our second one about sexual desires. I think that now you have a very dramatic demonstration of how sex and love can be fused to constitute this one thing that you're calling, and I will call too, erotic or sexual love. Now I guess we have the complete solution of the problem. Is that right?
Not quite. Because, Mr. Luckman, there's still one further difficulty that I kept till the end, and I think we can see it now, and I think we have to face it. It involves a question to which both Freud and Aristotle give answers, and opposite answers, and I don't know which is right. It's very hard to tell which is right.
These aren't in agreement.
No. Let me see if I can talk about this problem a little and get it somewhat clear. This problem is stated as follows. In erotic love, is sexual desire the source, the root of the love, or is the benevolent impulses of love the root of erotic love? Let me put that question quite concretely. When people fall in love, which do they say first? I want you, or I like you? We know that when a man falls in love with a woman, he is saying two things, both I like you and I want you. But which is he saying first? I like you first, and then subsequently I want you? Or I want you first, and then subsequently I like you? Let me show you a picture, which I think makes this even more concrete. As you look at that picture, does it make a difference to you whether you interpret the young man as saying, first of all, I want you, or on the contrary, first of all, I like you? I think it does. Now, I don't know which is the way that love does occur. If one looks at Aristotle and Freud, one finds them saying opposite things here, and I don't know which is right. But I do know this, that it makes a great difference, to the result, which way it does occur. For if sex comes first, and if wanting comes first, and remains primary, then the love is likely to be fickle and short-lived, as changeable as sex itself. But if the love comes first, that is, if liking comes first, then the relationship is likely to be quite stable. It probably can endure all the vicissitudes of love, and perhaps even outlast a total dissipation of sexual interest. And there's one further point here. The selectivity of erotic love, the choice of its object, this man loving that woman, this woman loving that man. This selectivity, this choice, is much more intelligible to me. When you think of it, it may be to you. If liking comes first and precedes wanting, rather than the reverse, rather than the other way around. Now, so much for today's problem. The problem we shall consider next time is the morality of love. Not just the distinction between moral and immoral love, between lawful and illicit love, but the deeper and more difficult difference between loves that are good as loves and loves that are bad as loves. I hope this problem of the morality of love interests you, that you will be with us again next time as we go on and complete the discussion of this great idea, the idea of love. Thank you very much.